Hey. This is Thiago. Thanks, thanks for joining us. Thanks for waiting. This is on today. We're here for the first of three events. So it's today we're here for like on play, vulnerability, and risk within safe space. It's the first of three other programs that we are organizing as part of the public programs for the exhibition Why We Are Embattled. And the next activities will be next week on the 15th. Like it's an activity with contemporary end. And on Saturday it's an activity, it's a meditation, it's a way to activate the works of Young Holmes, who is also an artist, part of Why We Are in Battle, the exhibition. So today we are here, and I mean, I didn't even properly introduce myself, but my name is Thiago de Paula Souza, and I'm one of the co-curators of the exhibition Why We Are in Battle with Nomaduma Masilela, who is also here with us. And we're gonna have a conversation with Sara Haq, Sabelo Mlangeni, and Temitayo Ogunbiyi, who is coming soon. While we are in battle, the exhibition, it's part of it's how this long-term research project that Nomaduma and we have assumed the form of an exhibition. Yeah, and so for the past 3, maybe 4 years, I would say 3 years, we have been meeting, the two of us. We have meeting with artists, thinkers, performers. We have had study groups. We have discussed online or in real life. We have tried different ways to so it's kind of like an ongoing exercise or an ongoing curatorial exercise to try to figure out how we can sustain, maintain, foster long-term relationships. Relationships that are based also on shared sensibilities, but also that are informed by our work practice. So it's kind of like a way to try to balance. How can we figure out ways to work together, stay together, and avoid some sometimes because of the way we have been working, because of the different activities we've been doing, the different gigs we're involved with, it might be difficult to foster or to give some sort of continuity to the work that we are doing. And so I would say that part of what we're trying to do together is to imagine ways of, and also imagining ways of working together and stay together. And while we are in battle, as I mentioned, is how the project, this long-term curatorial research, assumes the form of an exhibition. The project itself is titled "How Do We Learn to Love Each Other While We Are in Battle in So Many Fronts?" And it's a question that we borrowed from Audre Lorde, and it's one of the entries of her cancer journals that was written in June 1986. And when we first start to when we borrowed that question, that was by the end of the summer in 2018, and we were imagining how to find new ways to work together. And for the exhibition itself, we invited a group of artists. So I will just check their names because I don't want to forget any of them. Oops. Okay, so why we are in battle is part of the seventh edition of Parasite Emerging Curatorial Program. So we applied with the project, with the exhibition project, and we were invited to present this exhibition part of the program. And then we invited Nor Abed, Morishin Alahi, Cachel Vitorino Brasileiro, Sara Haq, who is here with us, Yoon Hoon Kim, who is going to organize the meditation next week, Caroline Lazard, Sabelo Mlangeni, J. Mombasa, Avery Z. Nelson, Temitayo Ogunbiyi, and a new commission of a reading room from Contemporary End, that is this both a magazine and an online platform based in Berlin, discuss mostly focusing on contemporary art and its diasporas. For today, here with us, we have, I'm going to start with the bio, like reading the bio by Sara. So Sara Haq, who lives in London, in South London. She's a multidisciplinary artist, a sacred medicine practitioner, and writer. The focus of her practice, journey into consciousness and healing, explore psychological, emotional, physical, and metaphysical unraveling. When we invited her for the exhibition, Sara offered us 7 works from a watercolor series titled Have You Ever Heard a Blueberry Scream? They were made during the lockdowns of 2020 and began as an exploration of dense emotional and interior states that can envelop a psyche under the duress of isolation in actively sitting with the legacies of trauma, but also show how such darkness moments can prove to be fertile ground for both personal and collective transformation. We also have here Sabelo Mlangeni, who is a photographer and now lives between, I would say, Durban, Johannesburg, and Paris. And for the exhibition, Sabelo shared with us a series of photographs titled The Royal House of Allure. Those images, those photographs, they collect intimacy, conviviality, and they were taken during a time that Sabelo was in residency in Lagos. Those pictures were taken at the Royal House of Allure. And the Royal House of Allure, it's a space, like a house, that provides emergency boarding and support for queer community. And driven by an ongoing interest in notions of community, Mlangeni focused on capturing the bounds that exist among his subjects and their methods of self-expression and self-representation. Coming soon, Temitayo Ogunbiyi, who lives in Lagos. She's an interdisciplinary artist, and her work explores the relationship between the environment, line, and representation. She's focused primarily through the vector of ludic play via interactive, sustainable play structures that she designs and builds. Part of her larger series of works entitled You Will, that started in 2016, and the small-scale mixed media sculptures selected for the exhibition reveal the politically productive valences of ludic play by connecting sites of play with the cultural concerns of Victoria and Yoruba hairstyling techniques, and Yasamu Neguchi's modernist playgrounds, with the real politics of migration routes, digital maps, like Google Maps, and surveillance. Okay, so this image that Nomaduma presented are exhibition views from the show, and also part of the works that are being exhibited, or I mean, they are part of the exhibition that stays at Parasite until November 20th. I would now invite Nomaduma.
Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Nomaduma Rosa Masilela, and I'm one of the co-curators with Tiago of While We Are Embattled, which is open until the end of next week, November 20th at Parasite. Today, for this public program conversation with Sara and Sabelo here with us now to begin with, and to be joined in 15 minutes or so by Temitayo Ogunbiyi, all of whose works you have seen. These are images from the exhibition that is currently up. And we wanted to talk with these three artists about their three very different series of works, which all in some sort of way connect, address questions of play, of vulnerability, of trust, and of risk, and how those are really inherent and important kind of affect within safe space, within the construction of it, within the maintenance of it. And this question of safe space is something that is really central to not only to kind of the conceptual concerns of our exhibition while we are embattled, but also if you saw from the images that we also shared, kind of we were trying to create a certain kind of embody within the exhibition, a certain kind of idea of safety, which is both about sort of being held with these kind of with the exhibition design that we did with Human Wu, of human architects, and this kind of idea of being like the fabric that surrounds, that kind of serves as the walls, there being no walls within the entire exhibition space, which then allows this kind of conversation really to happen between the works. The works are very much in dialogue, all of them within each other, creating some kind of like landscape that can be sort of seen, but is also obfuscated and in ways opaque at times. You can see the other viewers, you know that you can also be seen. So there's much more of like a conversation amongst the bodies, both human and kind of object artwork bodies within the space. And this question of safety I think is also really important for thinking through the states of embattlement while we are embattled that we raised within the exhibition, which is obviously coming out of a pandemic, or in a pandemic, remaining in a pandemic, experiencing the lockdowns, but also kind of different states of occupation and of kind of military or political occupation, of war, kind of the ecological crisis. We were trying to take these into consideration, to think about kind of a general state of embattlement and how do we kind of support each other and connect with each other. So sort of to provide this frame for these conversations that we will have today. And so and also kind of this question of how safety kind of enables greater possibilities of vulnerability and of risk. This is also something that we really want to discuss with the artists who are present, and how this informs their practices. I think sort of to begin, we wanted to open the floor to Sara and Sabelo, and to ask them how their series, for Sara, have you ever heard of Blueberry Scream? These beautiful watercolor on paper works that you saw that are displayed on these sort of round wooden structures. And Sabelo's photograph series, Royal House of Allure, and to speak about the conditions and the considerations that formed the making of these series. And maybe if you want to kind of get into this, to think about how this relates to the general ethos of your practice as a whole. So maybe whoever feels ready, but also we can also alphabetically with Sara, but whoever feels ready. We also just want to be clear that we want this to be as much of a conversation as possible, even though we both gave these very formal introductions. But yeah, we're really happy to be in conversation with everyone.
You go first,
I guess.
Oh. Would you like me to go first, or you happy to?
Yeah, you can go first.
Okay. Being like super polite. Okay, thank you both. So I'll start, but please interrupt me or ask a question if you need to. So yeah, conditions and considerations that form these works. So it's so we first encountered each other through the Berlin Biennale, which both yourself and Tiago, Gavin Kobo, Yvette Mutumba, and Suraburi Moses were all also part of the kind of curatorial team. Is that everybody? Did I miss someone? I think that's everybody. Yeah. So like, oh, it feels like so long ago. That was 2018 in Berlin. And actually, and I'm going back to that work because actually it very much kind of brought me to what's happening with these watercolors, which actually were not really made for public consumption initially. Actually, they were much more coming from a very internal process. The drawings that were made, a series of 35 drawings that were made in Berlin, was called Things I Did That Nobody Noticed, but That Changed Everything. And they reference actually kind of, the title references a series of survival strategies employed in spaces that were supposed to be safe, but that weren't. And in that, I'm talking about hospitals, psychiatric hospitals, spaces that are supposed to be of sanctuary and healing. And unfortunately, a lot of those spaces in the Western world are not. They're actually quite the opposite. So this notion of space, or this idea of safe space, and what does that mean? When actually, if one is in a state of extreme distress or in like fleeing from oppression, persecution, violence, whatever might be going on, or discrimination, might be deep layers of discrimination, where does one go? And actually, why cannot that safe space happen in our current surroundings? Like, how do we set that up? Now, the lockdowns have been, and the series, which of how have you ever heard of Blueberry Scream, the title also came from a state of consciousness that I would call altered state of consciousness, of actually experiencing quite literally the consciousness of a blueberry screaming as I ate it. Now, the detail that happens when you are, or the kind of attention to detail that happens when one is locked down, or when one is in a state of like confinement, or any of these kind of things, the attention that occurs, the attention for connection, actually the possibility of different connections, for me is fascinating. And the questions that we've together been exploring through the sort of I don't know how to describe the sort of community that's forming, exploring this question of how do we learn to love each other while we are so embattled on so many fronts. My interest is in the how do we learn to love each other. And it's really interesting to be engaging with this question of embattlement, because quite often that's it's often very internal, and then it gets kind of projected or exploded around us in ways. So yeah, the conditions and considerations were very much a kind of sitting with and being with these internal conflicts in a way that, how do I digest this internal rage or conflict or anger towards some of the violences that I've experienced in my own body, that occur to other people's bodies regularly, to bodies that are considered marginal within the contexts wherever we are. So these kind of sites of the world projecting conflict on one, and one having that in oneself, and how to allow space for it very freely. I don't know if this is making sense. I hope it's making sense. Sometimes these are very, like, this series was made, they were sort of works in progress that were started in 2020 after a hospital admission during the pandemic, and these kind of sites of moving in and out, exploring kind of embodied states that are very physical and very visceral, that are kind of somehow the pieces that we selected 7. There's probably about 100 and between 125 150 of them actually in total that were made between, I think, the end of August 2020 and around maybe December. So and they were made at the kitchen table. They were made in a space of isolation and in sitting with significant quantities of trauma in my body, but also in the collective around. So it was very much a kind of, okay, what's happening here? I don't know. So sometimes they were not particularly this idea of play, allowing myself to just on a page, whether it was noodle around with some paint or to get something out, or to sometimes the process was pleasurable and cathartic, and other times it really wasn't. It was actually a kind of quite an uncomfortable kind of having to give space to things that actually one would generally actively want to push away. So moving towards those things rather than rejecting them has been like quite a fierce practice. And this is perhaps one expression of those things. And how does it relate to the ethos? It's maybe one part of sorry, cat is arriving. There is a cat under me who might join in. So how does the ethos? So I guess a lot of the ethos of my practice is partly to do with presence practices, to be able to stay with the things that are there. In the last years, there's been a lot more looking in, but also understanding that looking in is also present very much out. You know, it's very much in the collective. Sometimes there are things that the collective likes to shove down, but it doesn't mean it's not there. So this is something that I'm really interested in, is how to find access points for people to engage with things that they might be disgusting or uncomfortable or somehow unacceptable, but even unpicking that language of what's acceptable and what's not is partly part of the kind of engagement of the things that I've done over many years. So that's the visitor. She's joining in.
I think this kind of I think there was, for me, it sounds there is like a lot of somehow trust being placed on the page. And also I feel for us, like feel really touched and honored to have received, have been able to look through and to choose with you the works, some of which from my reading and understanding of them seem to like really reflect these watercolors reflect like a really painful internal process that is happening, or like it is an expression of some kind of internal turmoil. And I think this like kind of question of trust is something that connects your and Sabelo's work, because I think Sabelo, you really work a lot in kind of connecting with the people that you photograph, or, and kind of establishing like a shared trust in the kind of like photographic language that you will use to sort of to show people.
Should I go for it? Yeah, I mean, that's my starting point in making photographs, is because I'm interested in intimacy and community. And over the years, I think as a photographer, I sort of learned that some things like these are things that actually come up in the photograph itself, in the sort of final making of a body of work. That relationship between the photographer and the people that collaborate, or that allows the photographer in their spaces or in their hearts, which is something very big. And I take it, I really appreciate it sometimes, and most always actually. So, but with House of Law, it's sort of because of time limits and residencies, and how sort of the build up to Lagos, or being build up to the residency. It's all started on social media. You know, it started with me following Bob Risky, which is I don't want, because she doesn't really identify as a transgender, but me, as like being an outsider, being a South African, I started following her on Instagram, and I had this kind of a conversation with her. And when the opportunity came, and my proposal was to follow her and sort of continue with the sort of following, like now, really not on Instagram, but follow her daily sort of routine in Lagos. So we had this kind of exchange, and I think even friends, they sort of made this contact, and everything was set. So when I got to Lagos, and she did not reply to my messages, and it became now a struggle now, because I had this idea that this is what I'm gonna do, and when I got there, then she sort of went quiet, and so I had to sort of go back to sort of social media again. And so I bumped into a video of James Brown, and with other people, like with Tonex and Ruby, they were sort of dancing. So I went through that kind of video, and I think I read the sort of very disturbing messages and in that post. And so I tried to make contact with James Brown. And also because in that video they had the Instagram handle. So I went to Instagram, I looked for James Brown, and I wrote him. He never sort of responded. But when I went back again, then I sort of took the handle of Tonex, which was part of the video. And so I wrote Tonex, and then I sent Tonex a PDF of Country Girls, because another thing with this work is that I was always thinking about this idea, or not even an idea, like this kind of building bridges as a work that I've sort of done in South Africa. So in South Africa, like the series Country Girls, for an example, that looks at the LGBTI community in the small towns and villages around a province of Mpumalanga. So it was sort of me, like this idea, I wanted to sort of open up this ongoing way of working, or a process. So, and with that PDF, and the next day I received a message back from Tonex, which was amazing. And I sort of, so I told him that, you know, I've been trying to get in contact with James Brown and what happened. And you know, now when you're talking about a safe space and risk, and he said something that made me understand why people like James Brown, they sort of ignored my messages or not responding to my messages, because of the risk that comes with them opening up to people, and also the danger, and not knowing who exactly I am, and how that can put them in sort of their life at risk. So, and after that, so he sort of made this kind of arrangement for me to meet, and he told me about this house, like a safe house. And then he told me that about the mother of the house, that if I want to go and to be in contact with James Brown, I have to talk to the mother of the house, and Mr. Morrison. So there was sort of this exchange, and then we had this kind of meeting. So they came to my residency house, and then, you know, that day, it was Sunday evening actually. I expected Mr. Morrison, the mother of the house, maybe with Tonex. And so I was there and then waiting for them. And then in the around 5-6 in the evening, they came, and in this kind of a private small car, and then 8-9 people came out of the car. And suddenly I was like, geez, this is going to be like a big meeting. And then so we went inside the house. And I had to sort of, already they went through, they were sort of already about, aware about the Country Girls, there's other series. So we had to sort of have this kind of exchange of why I'm interested to work with James Brown. And so that's where the introduction of the house and telling me that actually there is a house in the mainland, which is from that day I was invited because there was a prayer happening, an evening prayer on a Sunday, where prayer for truth. When we go through the series of the series of House of Allah, there's a grid of images that I photographed that evening. I call them the prayer for truth, but I like how some kind of this title of prayer for truth sort of plays, sort of is kind of open, because as much as that prayer was about one of the members of the house who lost their lives, who lost his life, and then so they came together for sort of as a memorial. And so when Mr. Morrison, after the meeting, invited me to come to the house, which is, it was surprising, and I agreed to go with them to the house, and which somehow, because I developed this kind of language where I have to be in a space without really picking up the camera. But that Sunday, and Mr. Morrison, we went to the house, he introduced me to everyone, which was about more than 15 people that were in the house for that memorial. And then, so he introduced me to everyone, and then what I'm doing as a photographer. But I had sort of this kind of pushback to pick up the camera that evening. And I went to him and asked if I can make photographs. He said, for sure, you can make a photograph. So just somehow, it sort of changed how sort of I work, which is, I had to be in, and I was using flash because there was no, like the light was very bad. So now I couldn't really like hide in a way. So it was sort of obvious when I was making, and they were sort of very direct images. But from that day, and that's when I sort of spent my whole time in the house. And somehow it sort of started me thinking about how even in a series like Country Girls, as much as the idea of a safe house is not clear in that body of work, but because in Emelo, there's Bafana's house, who's one like it's more like a mother. So it's all the young people who sort of have struggles or issues with families, so they end up in his house. And then, so I started to think about how these two works sort of somehow relate to each other, and also sort of how somehow they're able to sort of build the bridge that sort of that was my first intention of being in Lagos. I don't know, yeah, voila.
Great. There's always some more. When there's always another detail of these stories that you never really reveal. Reveal before.
Yes.
Good.
I hide them in images.
Okay. Cool. So now we have with us here Temitayo. Tayo, can you hear us? Can you see us?
Yes, I can hear you. I can see you. Hi,
Perfect.
everyone.
Perfect.
Hi, Tayo.
Great to see you. You look very nice. You look good.
Thank you.
Yeah, we just started. So I briefly introduced the project, the exhibition. Nomaduma complemented it and introduced we introduced the artist, and Nomaduma complemented my intro and talked about today's talk. And there was like this question that Nomaduma made, asked them about the practice, about like both, not the practice, but about the works that both Sara and Sabelo are presenting in the exhibition, if they could talk a little bit more about the process of production. And then this just like a recap. Nomaduma realized or mentioned that there is something in between both Sara's and Sabelo's work, that is the notion of trust. And I guess we can even get from that to bring you into the conversation. Because I guess like the notion of trust is also super important when we are discussing play. You know, like, I mean, of course, the risk is always going to be there, but maybe to start to warm up a bit. And of course, this is not like a question answer. You can even take some more time to think. But maybe we could discuss like what is the role that trust plays in your research, in your practice. This is just like a question for you to think now. And I also would like to go back to what Sara also said before. So the original name of, like, I mean, we borrowed the question from Audre Lorde, how do we learn to love each other while embattled on so many fronts? And Sara also mentioned that how do we learn is her favorite part of the question. If maybe you didn't say favorite.
How do we learn to love?
How do we learn to love? Yeah.
How do we learn to love is the part that you think it's more, it's kind of like your favorite one. And I think that this also reminded that when Amaduma was also writing the curatorial essay, she emphasized this notion of the to understand that for the exhibition we were thinking more in this moment here now. So like, I mean, the question somehow transitions to this state where different things are cohabiting. Not that when we ask the question, these things are not also happening at the same time, but it's more like to engage in this moment of transition, you know, and I guess this is also in kind of like, it's clear in a way when we think about the exhibition space itself, and the absence of walls, for example, and how the works are kind of contaminating each other, or how the urban landscape from Hong Kong or Hong Kong's landscape also contaminate Temitayo's work, or like Temitayo's work was not first imagined to be seen in that landscape suddenly becomes part of that, and then like the Royal House of Allure is somehow in close relation to Yung Hong's work. Like, I mean, like, so I think like the exhibition tried to become some sort of like a capsule of, like, I mean, this conjunction while is almost like a way to kind of to try to kind of like freeze or to capture like a moment.
But maybe also, Temitayo, we can just ask you a similar question that we posed to Sara and Sabelo, because I think also with your work there needs to be, we showed installation shots from the exhibition, which you know, so we're kind of remaining within the context of the exhibition as Tiago is like explaining the conceptual and like kind of conditions of the exhibition, but I think also with your work, like why we placed it at the window, right, was because your work really is about public space and about kind of play in public space. And these small sculptures that you made that are part of this You Will series, these 3 works, You Will Find Playgrounds Among Trends, You Will Consider Each Dead End Before a New Way, You Will Find Courage When Seeing and Lose. These are all in conversation with sort of the larger place structures that you make. And so maybe, you know, we haven't introduced this, and maybe this is a good moment maybe for you to talk about this, and maybe the same question kind of that was posed to Sara and Sabelo was like, what are the conditions and considerations of this series of work that you have presented, and how does it fit into kind of your wider practice, particularly in relation to the concerns of the exhibition, possibly?
Sure. So I think, apologies, I'm in a loud place, but I felt the need to be outside today. So I hope everyone can hear me clearly. To begin, I mean, thinking about the title of the exhibition is something I feel, it's an idea that I think about every day. You know, how do we learn to love one another while we were embattled on so many fronts, which I know is a longer version from which the exhibition title has been extracted. But I think the idea of being embattled, the idea of being different, the idea of having different orientations to what it means to live a full life and live in conversation with one's surroundings is extremely subjective. And it really comes down to a matter of personal preference. But I feel despite that, we can still find ways to connect. And I think for me, connecting is the starting point of any kind of love that we would hope for between ourselves and another, or between different communities. And I think my practice is really about creating communities, perhaps communities that are temporary, communities that are fragmented across different times and different geographies, but that come together by interacting with my work in ways that they choose to. I think part of love for me is also just the idea of giving people room to be how they want to be in public space. And the three pieces that I present that are part of the exhibition at Parasite are different ideas for play structures that I was thinking through when I first began to think about creating non-prescriptive play objects that people could play with in any way they felt, as opposed to being forced to play with things like small houses or slides or swings that kind of have a prescribed way of being interacted with. You know, I really wanted my work to open up possibilities. And I think opening up possibilities gives people the room to express themselves in a way that can show oneself to a stranger, but also allows us to get to know ourselves better. Because I do strongly believe that any sort of outward expression of love is a reflection of some sort of inner peace or inner contentment. And I think the idea of loving is simultaneously an outward expression, but also an inward reflection. And so I think my practice and these works really connect to those ideas. And thinking about the idea of trust that Tiago mentioned earlier, you know, I try to trust the process of conceiving these works. I try to trust that the public will find a way to respond and interact to the works that I put out into the world. But I think I also, you know, try to trust that the materials that I use can be ever manipulated and seen anew through my practice and through how people engage with the materials through how I present them. So those are some loose thoughts that have been ruminating as you all have been speaking today.
I mean, I think as much, thank you, Temitayo. I think also as much as this, like I have kind of, you speak about like non-prescriptive ways of playing, made me sort of reconnect to Sara Haq's point about, so I always say Sara Haq, I don't just say your first name somehow. It has stuck.
It's a thing. It's okay. I love it. I love it from you.
Or 5 years later, it's still Sara Haq. But kind of
remind me who I am.
Like to think about altered states of consciousness, right? And I think this kind of like openness and kind of like openness to non-prescriptive or kind of altered states or kind of or this idea of like kind of presence practices, which also I think sort of reconnects to Sabelo's sort of method of kind of photographing and connecting with the sort of communities that you connect with. And but I guess also as much it is about, I think it also is an opportunity because we were making the exhibition under certain conditions in which none of us could sort of come to meet each other in person, to see the works in person installed in conversation. This is just equally as much an opportunity for you all to get to somehow to get to know each other. We know the reasons why we have put your works in conversation. And, you know, this is obviously, this isn't to put you on the spot, but I think and why these very different series, like works on paper, photographs, sculpture, kind of make sense being in conversation. But we're also really open to obviously having this conversation kind of enter into whichever grounds you so desire, beyond kind of our restrictions, or our kind of like kind of containment, to have it be contaminated however you so desire, borrowing from Tiago.
There was something, I guess my connection cut for a moment, and maybe I missed something that you said, Duma, but there was something that was in my mind also that you mentioned these days, about the fact that the three of you, like Sara, Sabelo, and Temitayo, you work with series. And maybe we could discuss that a bit, like if it's something that happens kind of like by accident, if there's like an intention, what exactly you do when you choose to work with a series. For example, I guess that from the three of you, Sabelo is the one that I know for longer, and so, for example, I know that like in previous research, for example, the Country Girls, you were working with that series for ages, for years, and so maybe we could think what exactly, maybe you have that very well elaborated in your minds, but or maybe you don't, but I was trying to wonder, what does it mean to work in like with a group of works for a longer period? You know, like it's a way to just close the process. It's a way that helps you also to think about the practice itself, or it's more something that happened.
I think personally, it's quite of like a lot of things. I think because from the beginning, I think this I've been interested in kind of this narrative or essaying, photo essaying for an example. So it was like, because sometimes you think, when you think of photography and think of the violence of the camera, and you sort of over the years, that's when sort of I started, as much as at first it was more like working on landscape and family, which is it was still like in around, and also like it's got this kind of a DNA in it, but you know, you start to move out of the family, and then also like this kind of like understanding all this kind of violences of photography. So this, and the fact that what I've said earlier, that, you know, what the lens, like what you point at and who the people that you work with, the photographs, they never lie. They tell the kind of time and the relationship that you have with the people. So for me, it was also like this way of kind of closing that kind of gap, and then being not just a photographer that comes and take, but a photographer that sort of you sort of become part of a community. And sort of also become, in a way, invisible. So in a way that it makes I think it makes the process, the working process, easily, because not easily, but you sort of get fused, and also like because it's no longer about the camera, that you're there with the camera, but you're there and as part of the community. So whenever, some days you have the camera, some days you don't have the camera, and people, they never like sort of ask why today you don't have the camera. So it's sort of, it's just part of the process of sort of thinking about what I've just like sort of realized over the years as a photographer, and how also, you know, I always say that that's the beauty of working in long-term work, is that, you know, we don't wake up or feeling the same way, for an example, every day. I'm working on a series of it's not related, but I'm working on this kind of now, like this editing and everything that I'm doing right now. So it's how I'm sometimes going back to this work and thinking about the time when I've made these photographs, and sort of how I felt at that time. And it's sort of this kind of layers of emotions and feelings. And I think that's also the beauty that of working on in long term, that all those kind of things, they sort of surface in the final kind of closing of the body of the work. As much as I never think about closing a body of work, I always keep things open, because I go back to the same communities. But also, like, it's not even about going back, because for me, I always say that it's about if it's a erasure of self. If maybe I say that I'm going to just, these stories are also about me. So these are like more personal stories. So it's sort of being there and I don't know. Does it? Yeah, cool.
I really, a lot of what you say really resonates with me as someone who's had a kind of long-standing photographic practices also. So my practice takes many forms. And initially I trained as a painter, but then I worked in photography for many years, and also equally with like series with large numbers in terms of constellations of images. And this, what you mentioned, this kind of so for me, this disclosure of a process, because it feels like there is this, investigation of the experience of being human, being alive, being in this body, being in this time, being in this place, and these collection of moments that are always shifting, passing, like honoring each of those in some way, and they're never the same. So I love what you said about that kind of truth, but approaching photography also with a kind of generosity, because it's very different to have that type of reflexivity in a practice rather than a kind of acquisitive, just like I'm trying and work out how to describe this kind of this relationship that goes on between what's in us and what we're experiencing and what we're perceiving. So this kind of perceptual studies in some ways, which is definitely something for me that in the paintings there's a kind of embodied kind of trying to grapple with how is this perceptual, how are these perceptual states kind of what are they, first of all, where do they come from, how do they manifest, not just in me and my body, but in the wider, what do they elicit when other people experience or encounter them. Those kind of conversations are very much kind of part of a rolling process, dialogue, investigation. So these paintings may be one part of a practice, but a practice that's actually kind of constellations of experience in some ways. So yeah, and then a distillation that happens as well. So for example, the selection you have is 7 out of, and I know same with the photography editing process. How do you that picking those moments and like and putting together maybe a different story from just a certain selection, or whether it's a sculptural distillation. I love what you said about this non-prescriptive play objects. Temitayo, that's just it really, this kind of how do you keep something as open as possible? So I love these questions and these ways of exploring.
I would definitely agree with what's been said by Sabelo and Sara. I mean, for me, I strongly feel that working in series helps me to not rush through ideas. I think it allows me to explore various concepts and modes of execution and return to those and feel like, I'm almost in a safe space in doing that. And I also feel that, the way that I title my works is connected to a way of communicating with a very wide audience, hopefully. And I think that because the titles give me an avenue through which to communicate, it's hard to kind of let go of this series that has taken many shapes and forms over the past 5 years now. So I think, or 6 years rather. So I think working in series reminds me that all that I do is connected in some way, shape, or form. And I think it challenges me to think about how seemingly disparate concepts or ways of creating can be connected and presented in conversation with one another.
Something else occurred to me, and when I did a big project called the Overland Project, which was mostly photographic series, and this is some years ago in 2008, I was also always thinking about access points. And as an artist who's kind of been predominantly educated in, like, I'm born and brought up in London, so I've been really surrounded by like the Western canon of kind of images, and that's not my full experience, in that I'd always encountered other stories, artists, people from all over the world. But actually, what I'm really interested in, actually not just exploring multiple access points, but also creating them in some ways. So and that's something that it's kind of in the back of my mind all the time, is like to enable the possibility of always to enable as many possibilities for connection as possible. And I realized that that's kind of quite important. Somehow, sometimes it's not always in the front of my mind, but maybe it's somehow it's been there sometimes from not necessarily being presented maybe with just one thing, without an access point, or without kind of, or like this, I don't know, sometimes some people have said to me, oh, you give too much. And I'm like, that's an interesting thing to say. And I'm like, but why not? You know, why not be generous? And then people can just take what they want, you know. I'm curious about this, like, tension sometimes between sharing like a lot or withholding, like what happens when you just withhold. So I'm curious about that. And actually it is quite like these works for me, they're quite raw. They're not things that I would have necessarily shared, but I felt able to do that because of the kind of spaces that have been set up, the long-term conversations and dialogues, and the kind of knowing that actually the connections between artists, which for me is just beautiful for me to experience how it's unfolding with you all today. So I felt able to do that because actually, yeah, they're kind of raw.
Interesting, this what you said about like you share too much. So it was, yeah, it's an interesting way. It's an interesting criticism for me. It's kind of like a criticism that I don't know if it was proper like a criticism, but I think it's one that you should embrace, because it's quite nice. Yeah, I do. That's part of how my practice gets public, or and I think it's also the oversharing, let's say like this, but can be like a method in a way, especially in moments when people are often holding so much, or also because of the nature of the whole art world, that sometimes you need to protect yourself, to avoid some sort of, I don't know, like that ideas are stolen, or that you don't properly get the credits, or that people might think that something is too raw, or I think it's also some sort of like a brave gesture, like to overshare in this. Yeah.
But there might be also a safety in creating. There might also be a safety in creating a kind of world. Like you're creating a constellation, so you're actually just cushioning almost yourself, or like the community you're exploring, or like this is the world. So maybe there's a certain unconscious safety in that as well.
Yeah, and there's also something. I mean, in the end, I guess that and this is me saying, but I guess that when Namaduma and we started working for the exhibition, I don't think we expected that the notion of safety would become so central. I mean, it has always been there, but I guess at first we didn't really envision that it would become so central. And of course, it's related to the art, because there's also this thing in the way that we work. I guess some things, although we try to share some things, they have some sort of like secret, It's something that you are not secret, but they are not really visible at the moment, or we can't really grasp them, or you can't really verbalize them in a way. And I guess this conversation is about safety. And of course, when we were discussing safety, it's always different from that idea of like biopolitics, safety, or security, or protect one's body, and definitely not. But like how safety more as a word that safety, just like how we used to work a lot for the Berlin Biennale, the 10th Berlin Biennale, safety as self-preservation somehow. That is definitely not endorsing a neoliberal idea of security. It's quite the opposite somehow, because the notion of safety that we're interested and also reflects on your practice and in today's talk is the one that also embrace risks, the one that embrace the openness, and also understanding that all safe spaces, they somehow are open spaces. This kind of be like almost like a cliche, but just like kind of like mirroring lives, like risk and openness are kind of like, for me, very elemental things to produce a safe space.
And I guess that was also like a guiding principle, which I think is being affirmed by how much I'm resonating with what all three of you, and also Tiago, you too, what you're saying somehow in this, that we were kind of seeking works and artists and who shared a certain kind of sensibility. And I think kind of what you're speaking to, Tiago, this idea of safety as a space in which there is vulnerability, which allows for vulnerability and risk and play, and but is not like, does not demand total transparency, but allows for each person's opacity, and and in which kind of other issues come up, other kind of kind of conflicts or kind of things that need to be resolved can come up, so that which is but hopefully with this kind of I don't know, with a certain kind of trust in the fact that there is a desire for this to be resolved. I think, sort of in working on this exhibition, there were, of course, like working during a pandemic, during lockdowns, and, we've all experienced this somehow, and trying to bring like a very public thing that demands other people's presence. Like an exhibition has had its issues. And I think like one thing that we kind of while we were figuring things out, and also while we were figuring things out between ourselves, Tiago and I, like working together, was, I don't know, just this kind of understanding that we want to be here and we want to figure it out, even in a feeling of embattlement. And I think this desire for our like collective work, or this desire to see these works in conversation, I think that was also something really important somehow. And I think kind of even sometimes reminding ourselves of like these shared sensibilities that we have, which is what connects us, and this desire to kind of grow from them, or to like build from them together, is something that I think is kind of echoed throughout your practices and throughout these works that you share with us in the exhibition.
Yeah, I guess that's not the wrap, but I guess we can kind of come to an end for now, for this series at least. I guess
I wonder if there are any questions from Sabelo, Sara, Temitayo, or also any of the visitors, guests that we have, viewers. If there are any questions for the artists, or just a kind of open, kind of open points. I think this entire yeah, the premise of this meeting also was, I mean, obviously had certain parameters, but was quite open in the sense that we were curious about these questions of play, of vulnerability, and how they intersect or don't within practices. Are there any questions?
We don't have any questions from the chat. But if you have like final considerations or anything that you wanted to share.
Sabelo, Sara, and Temitayo, you're asking them?
It's very lovely to be in conversation about these works. It feels like the beginning potentially of some really interesting further conversations, which I would love to have. And I guess another two words come to mind, which are to do with rather than just safety, but actually care. So how when care is taken and when hospitality is felt, that actually safe space becomes implicit. And it's really interesting to kind of just, I'm always thinking about like how to reframe in ways that have easy open possibilities for opening. So,
and I guess, what you just said now about care and hospitality, I mean, so we are now meeting on Zoom from our various locations. I'm back in Berlin, Tiago's back in Gothenburg, but we were in Hong Kong, which is where the exhibition is set. And I think, and had were able to visit the exhibition and meet the team of Parasite, who had also been working to present the works, all of your works, and our like exhibition idea also understates some embattlement of like coming out of or being in really intense lockdowns and I guess we were like a lot of the concerns of the exhibition and sort of the artists that we brought, we really imagined them being in conversation with conditions and concerns of Hong Kong itself. I mean, this is why we placed Temitayo's work like at the window to kind of think about play. And while we were in Hong Kong, it was really exciting to see that there is this Isamu Noguchi installation at M+ Museum, which is like very clearly in conversation with Temitayo's work and kind of her own play sculptures, but also kind of these greater concerns of, I mean, of course, in Sara, your work that is about dealing with social isolation during lockdowns that you experienced in London was something that we hoped would really resonate with visitors who would come to Parasite. And similarly, I think really it was Sabelo, your work, that made us think about, through the Royal House of Allure as a safe house, as a space in which people then could really feel free to explore and kind of present themselves and be in community. And that is a safe space, really open, really directed us towards thinking about this and thinking about these terms and these concerns within the space of an exhibition, and that really framed and guided us, and what that would mean to do this in the context of Hong Kong, which has its own kind of states of embattlement that it is contending with, and also knowing that we are coming as outsiders, and I think this is coming to a space that has very particular history and concerns, and of course being aware of it because we read the news, we can read like a history, but it was made such a big difference to be there physically when we were able to come after the exhibition opened, to also understand, maybe come a little bit closer and touch a bit closer what are some of what is like the kind of the emotional cartography of Hong Kong, and to experience it in that moment, which was really, I mean, I'm still sort of processing, and we are both not only very hopeful and excited to continue working with all of you. You know, of course, we all have like our kind of, these are already ongoing relationships, and you know, we have already done these workshops together, Sara and Temitayo, and but to think about, yeah, how does this exhibition move and grow, and also what does it mean that now it has been in Hong Kong and we have been able to be in conversation with artists and practitioners from Hong Kong, and you know, how does that like affect what is happening in that room, and like how's that informed, like changed sort of the ways in which we think of these questions of safety, of vulnerability, and of risk, having been there and having had this exhibition be there. So really like what we, because this question also of like, of the context, and we really wanted to sort of begin a conversation with terms that we had and sort of understandings that we had, and to share these certain experiences in order to begin some kind of longer term conversation with artists and kind of thinkers in Hong Kong as well. So I think, and also for your practices as well, to sort of like, what are the ways in which your practices resonate within Hong Kong, and the people who visit the exhibition or the city itself. I just wanted to say this because I think it's kind of easy to sort of feel completely disembodied while in a Zoom call, and you know, and we're all calling from very different places. So I just wanted to kind of try to ground us a bit more at Parasite, our host.
Well, thank you very much. This is Marlene, by the way, from Parasite. And I just want to thank the three artists that participated in our first public program here for the exhibition. And I have to say that the important thing is how it is